1 week after I buried my husband, my boss said I had no value left. The next morning, he fired me. I was 3 days away from hitting 30 years, the mark for full pension. That night, I saw my daughter-in-law stepping out of his apartment. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something colder. They thought they'd ended me for good. But they forgot. I still remembered how to begin again. I always thought if I kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed out of trouble, the world would at least leave me alone. For 29 years and 362 days, I walked through the same back entrance of the Grant Field food plant in Des Moines, Iowa. Same steel door, same time clock, same heavy blue coat hung in the same locker. I was the woman who triple-checked expiration dates and smiled when no one else did. My husband passed 1 week ago. Quiet. Slow. Cancer doesn't ask if you're ready. I buried him with my hands shaking and my chest caving in, then returned to work 3 days later. I didn't have the luxury of time. Just 3 more days and I'd reach my 30th year. Then I'd finally be eligible for the full pension. That number meant everything. It meant I could stop worrying. It meant I'd earned my rest. That morning, my badge didn't beep when I scanned in. I tried twice, maybe 3 times, before Trent's voice crackled through the intercom. He said he needed to see me. I thought it might be a tech glitch, or maybe something about my schedule. I walked through the hallway without a clue of the storm about to hit. His office always smelled like too much aftershave. The blinds were drawn. He didn't look up when I entered. I sat anyway. My heart thudded once, twice. Then came the sentence. No build-up, no gentle tone. Doreen, this isn't working anymore. Your performance has slipped. It's time to let you go. I blinked. The clock behind him ticked. 7:41 a.m. I didn't say a word. Not because I didn't want to, but because my body didn't understand how. I had planned this out. 30 years, full pension, medical coverage for life. 3 days. And now it was gone. Just like that. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, a printed termination notice, a severance check, and a list of company property I had to return. I picked up the folder without looking at him. I walked back down the hallway without a single person making eye contact. The locker I had used for almost 3 decades had a yellow sticker on it. Temporary reassignment. I guess they didn't waste time. I packed my things slowly. I didn't cry. I just folded everything in the same order I had always done. Then I stepped out into the December wind, clutching my coat and my silence. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the photo of me and Kenneth on our wedding day. I whispered I was sorry. I felt like I had let both of us down. Then came the moment I didn't expect. At exactly 8:32 p.m., I opened the curtains in the front room and saw headlights across the street. A woman stepped out, slim, tall, wearing a grey coat I had seen before. I leaned forward, my knees locked. It was Heather, my daughter-in-law. She walked toward the apartment building across from mine. The lights on the second floor flicked on. Trent's apartment. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Just watched as she rang the buzzer and walked inside like she'd done it 100 times. That night, I didn't sleep. And not because I'd lost my job. If any of you listening have ever felt like your life just cracked in two, you'll understand this part. Not the moment it breaks, but the silence after, when you sit there wondering if it was always coming. If maybe the people closest to you had been waiting for the right moment to make sure you'd never stand again. I didn't have answers that night, but I did have one thought. If they thought I'd disappear quietly, they didn't know me at all. I would still finish something. And this time it wouldn't be for a paycheck. It would be for me. I didn't open the severance folder until the following afternoon. It sat on my kitchen table like a sealed insult, daring me to read it. When I finally did, I found no surprises. A check for 1 week's pay, no extension, no benefits, no mention of the pension. Just a line that said, effective immediately, my employment had been terminated for performance issues. Performance issues. In 29 years and 362 days, I had never once been written up, never missed a shift without notice, never took longer than 22 minutes for lunch. I once came in with my arm in a sling. That wasn't enough to stop me. But apparently grief was. I called the company's HR line, not to beg, just to verify. I was told flatly that pension only vested at the 30-year mark. Missing it by even a day meant the full package didn't apply. The voice on the other end sounded tired, like she had repeated this line many times. I thanked her and hung up. My fingers stayed curled around the phone long after the dial tone faded. Outside, snow had started to fall. It didn't stick, just floated like dust across the ground. I stood at the window and watched the street. Heather's car wasn't parked across from Trent's building anymore. But I wasn't looking for her this time. I was trying to feel something. Anger, panic, anything sharp enough to slice through the numbness. But nothing came. Instead, I started cleaning. The house had been still for weeks. Since Kenneth passed, I had only touched what was necessary. I moved from room to room with a kind of mechanical focus. Stripped sheets, bleached the kitchen sink, tossed out old coupons we never used. When I opened the hallway closet, a stack of insurance mail slid down. I caught one envelope before it hit the floor. It was addressed to Kenneth, from the company's benefits office. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a summary of our joint coverage status. Life insurance, pension survivor details. I flipped through the packet, reading over every detail. Then I stopped. There, in sharp print, was a name I didn't expect. Beneficiary, Heather Lynn Halverson. I stared at it for a long time. That couldn't be right. Kenneth and I had signed our plans together 3 years ago. We agreed everything would go to me. That had never been a question. We never even discussed anyone else. I walked to the study and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Kenneth kept all his important documents there. The folders hadn't been touched. I pulled out the one marked Benefits and flipped through the forms. All in order, his signature at the bottom. My name listed on every line until 2020. That year, the form looked different. My name was scratched out. Heather's was typed in. The signature below looked like Kenneth's, but something about it was off. I had been with that man since I was 19. I knew how he dotted his I's. I knew the slight tilt of his R's. This wasn't his handwriting. It was too stiff, too deliberate. I pulled the paper closer, bringing it to the window for better light. My heart pounded slower, heavier. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking, but denial didn't hold up under a magnifying glass. I didn't know when Heather had started meddling, or how she had gained access to our documents. But something told me this wasn't just a mistake. It was a move, a calculated one. I returned the papers to the folder and placed it back in the drawer. Then I sat down in the chair Kenneth used to love, the one by the window that creaked when he leaned back. I looked out at the street again. It was empty now, clean and still. I wasn't. There was a knot inside me that tightened every time I blinked, not from rage, but from clarity. This wasn't grief anymore. This was theft. And someone, somewhere, had underestimated just how much I had left in me. On Saturday morning, I woke up before the sun. My body moved before my thoughts could catch up. I didn't eat. I didn't change out of my robe. I just walked straight into the spare bedroom, the one we used to call the sewing room, even though I had never sewn a thing. That was where Kenneth stored the photo albums and boxes from the early years. The air in that room always smelled a little like old cardboard and cedar. I reached up to the top shelf of the closet and pulled down the green plastic tub labeled Family. It was heavy. Inside were 3 photo albums, a stack of school drawings from our boys, and a pile of loose envelopes Kenneth never got around to filing. I opened the first album. Pictures of us in our 20s, his arm around me at a county fair. Our son, Cole, being held in his father's arms in a backyard wading pool. Christmas in 1996. A trip to Omaha. Then I saw something odd. Tucked between 2 pages was a small square photo. It wasn't part of the album. I pulled it out. It was printed from a phone, a cheap, glossy print, the kind people don't usually keep. The photo showed a woman sitting on a couch with a man behind her. The angle was low, like someone had taken it from across the room in secret. My stomach went cold. It was Heather, no makeup, wearing the blue puffer jacket she usually kept in the back seat of her car. She was sitting in a living room that looked eerily familiar. I stared at the pattern on the pillows, cream with navy stripes. Then I noticed the man behind her. You could only see part of his profile, grey at the temples. A watch I recognized. It was Trent. I didn't remember Kenneth ever printing photos like this. He barely touched his phone. And this one looked recent. It must have been taken in the last few months. The photo wasn't dated, but the objects around them, the coffee table, the light fixture, matched what I'd seen through the apartment window the night I watched Heather walk in. I turned the photo over. In faint pencil, the initials TW were written in the corner. I dropped it on the floor. My hand started shaking. It was one thing to suspect something, another to have a fragment in your fingers, something that made it harder to rationalize. I picked it up again and walked it to the kitchen. I laid it under the light and just stared. The room in the photo wasn't furnished cheaply. Trent's apartment had always been a bit upscale for someone in his position. I remembered that his promotion had come 6 months ago, not long after he'd replaced the previous plant director. That director had retired early. Very early. Too early. The pattern was forming, not fully, but enough that my instincts kicked in. Heather was clever. She had always been charming in front of others, never crossed lines, always helpful. But lately she'd taken more control in our family conversations. She made the plans, spoke for Cole, handled every piece of paperwork when Kenneth had gotten sick. I remembered how she insisted on helping me with bills and hospital forms. At the time, I had thought it was kindness. Now, I wasn't so sure. I walked to the hallway closet and opened the safe. Kenneth kept everything important in there. I had the combination. It clicked open easily. Inside were insurance papers, our will, and a folder labeled pension. I pulled that last one out. I sat on the couch and opened the folder. The documents were there. Some were older than others. I flipped through them one by one. Then I saw it. A form dated August 2020. Change of beneficiary. It listed Heather, not me. I looked at the signature. It looked like Kenneth's, but it wasn't exact. Something about the curl of the K, the flatness of the E. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. My heart beat slow and heavy. I placed the signature page side by side with a form from 2018. His real signature. It was smoother, more natural. The newer one looked copied, forced. My throat dried out. I set the papers down and pressed both palms against my forehead. I knew what I had to do next. Not just to get angry, not just to wonder. I needed someone to look at these signatures, someone who could see what I was starting to see. I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts I hadn't touched in years. Then I saw her name, Elaine Garber, Kenneth's old friend, a retired insurance investigator. I tapped the number and pressed the phone to my ear. The line rang, and I waited. The phone rang 5 times before I heard her voice. Elaine answered with the same calm drawl she always had, like nothing in this world could rattle her. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a decade, but she recognized me on the second sentence. I told her I needed help. She didn't ask why. She just said she'd come by the next morning. By 8 o'clock sharp, Elaine pulled into my driveway in the same tan sedan she'd driven since her retirement party. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She walked in, placed her purse on the table, and looked me dead in the eye. "Let's see what you've got." I handed her the folder with the pension forms and the life insurance change. Then I placed the photograph of Heather and Trent on top. She didn't react right away, just studied each page, moving with a stillness that made the air in the room feel heavier. After 20 minutes of silence, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. The signature on the change of beneficiary form was a problem. She didn't say it was fake. She said it didn't match Kenneth's usual stroke pressure, said the ink looked newer than the paper. Then she flipped to the original 2018 document and pointed out where the pressure faded at the loop of the K, a sign of a live signature. The newer one was smooth throughout, even, like someone had traced it or copied it. Then she moved on to the photo. She asked where I found it. I told her. She nodded, said it wasn't an accident, that it was tucked into the family album. Someone wanted it found. Then she asked when Kenneth's cancer had worsened. I told her it had accelerated just 6 months before his death. She tapped the document again and said that timing mattered. The signature on the revised form was dated 2 months before he passed. She stood up, walked to the sink, and poured herself a glass of water. Then she said something I hadn't expected. If this was forged, and I mean if, then whoever submitted it had to access his personal records, get a hold of your mail, and understand exactly what paperwork to change. That takes more than coincidence. She paused. It takes access. And motive. I sat down hard in the dining chair. Elaine pulled a small tablet from her purse. Said she still did consulting now and then. She started taking photos of the documents, both the old and new forms. She took pictures of the envelopes they came in. Then she pulled out a small scanner and started collecting metadata from the prints. The way she moved was clinical, decisive. She told me she had a friend in Omaha who worked with estate fraud. Quiet cases. She would send the files over for analysis. In the meantime, she wanted to know everything I remembered about Heather's involvement in Kenneth's care. So I told her. How Heather handled the hospital bills, how she sat in on every meeting with the doctors, how she insisted on managing the insurance paperwork when Kenneth got too tired, how she offered to help with the mail and even picked it up some days, so I wouldn't have to leave the house. Elaine didn't interrupt. She just nodded slowly and kept writing in her notebook. When I finished, she placed the notebook down and looked at me. She said if Kenneth didn't physically sign that paper, and if Heather submitted it on his behalf, and if Trent had anything to gain from it, it was enough to start a case. She also reminded me that forged beneficiary changes were difficult to fight without forensic proof. But the fact that the signature didn't match, that the ink was fresh, that Heather had control of incoming documents, those were leads, and they were real. Elaine left with a copy of everything. She said she'd reach out to her contact and have an initial report within the week. She promised to keep it off the record, at least until we had something more concrete. After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen. I stared at the space where she had been sitting. For the first time in days, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't whole, but I wasn't broken either. I walked back into the living room and picked up Kenneth's photo. I whispered, "I'm working on it." Then I put it back on the shelf. I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing, still, focused. I didn't know what Elaine would find, but I knew one thing. I had stopped surviving, I had started digging, and I wasn't about to stop now. The next few days passed in a quiet blur. I kept the house dark and the curtains drawn, not out of sadness, but strategy. I knew how people talked in this town. It only took one person seeing Elaine's car for rumors to start spreading. So I let the phone go to voicemail. I didn't answer Cole's texts either. I needed space. And more than that, I needed time to think. I spent most of my hours at the dining table, sorting through papers. I laid everything out in categories: insurance forms, pension documents, medical records, and something else. I had started pulling our old bank statements. Kenneth and I had used the same credit union for 35 years. We kept it simple. No credit cards, just a joint checking and a modest savings account. But something had changed in the last year. There were transfers I didn't recognize. Small at first, then larger, and always just below $5,000. That was important. I remembered Elaine once telling me that anything over 5,000 triggered more scrutiny at most banks. The money had gone into an account I didn't know existed. It wasn't in Kenneth's name, but it matched a pattern. Bi-weekly, like clockwork. Each transfer happened a day or two after Heather had taken over his bills. I printed the statements and highlighted every line. By Thursday afternoon, Elaine called. She didn't speak in code, just asked if she could stop by. I said yes. She arrived within the hour, wearing a wool coat and carrying a thin manila envelope. She sat down across from me and opened it without ceremony. Inside was a printout, a preliminary analysis from her friend in Omaha. The signature on the change of beneficiary form was confirmed inconsistent with Kenneth's known writing samples. Pressure mismatched, stroke angles off. The conclusion wasn't definite, but the report said the signature had a high likelihood of being replicated. She said that was enough to begin a case, but not enough to win one. Then she asked if I had found anything else. I slid the highlighted bank statements across the table. She read through them quickly, then again more slowly. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes moved with more purpose. She asked if I had contacted the bank. I shook my head. She said not to, not yet. But she took a photo of every page. Then she sat back and crossed her arms. There's a pattern here, and people make mistakes when they repeat themselves. She tapped one statement in particular. A transfer on the 14th of October. The same day, Trent had hosted a fundraiser for the local Chamber of Commerce. I remembered because Kenneth had been too ill to attend. But Heather went. She insisted one of us should be there to maintain appearances. I had assumed she meant on behalf of the family. Now I wasn't so sure. Elaine said the timing was too perfect. Trent's promotion had come just a week after that fundraiser. He'd gone from operations manager to plant director overnight. No warning, no internal review. Then Elaine said something else. She had checked the county registrar's office that morning. 2 months before Kenneth died, a property had been purchased in Heather's name, a small condo, paid in full, no mortgage. The payment matched the total of those bank transfers. I leaned back in my chair. My hands were still, but my chest tightened. Elaine said we needed one more piece, something tangible, something to tie Heather and Trent directly, not just financially, personally. So we made a plan. She would continue tracking the transfers and see if she could get access to the account holder details through her contact. In the meantime, she suggested I look for any digital trails, emails, texts, photos, anything Kenneth might have left behind. I didn't like the idea at first. Going through his phone felt like breaking something sacred, but I understood. If someone had used his trust to manipulate our family, then I needed to face it. That night, I charged Kenneth's old phone. The battery was nearly dead, but it powered on. His passcode hadn't changed. I knew it by heart. Once inside, I scrolled through the messages. Most were from me or Cole, a few from Heather. But the real surprise was hidden in the Notes app. Kenneth had left a folder labeled Just in Case. Inside were voice memos, 5 of them. The first one was dated 3 weeks before he died. I pressed play. His voice cracked from the start. He said he wasn't sure how much time he had, that he didn't want to scare me, but that he'd noticed things. Papers going missing, mail arriving late, Heather asking questions about his policies. One night, he woke up and found her in his office, rifling through the filing cabinet. She smiled and said she was looking for a stapler. He didn't confront her, but he started documenting everything after that. The last memo ended with his voice shaking. He said he was worried. Not about dying, but about what might happen after. I sat there for a long time, holding the phone in my lap. The betrayal felt deeper now, more deliberate. And what haunted me most was that Kenneth had tried to warn me, quietly, gently, in his way. I transferred the files to a flash drive and locked it in the safe. We weren't guessing anymore. We were building a case. Elaine called just before 7 the next morning. Her voice was flat, direct. She told me to dress warm and be ready in 20 minutes. She wouldn't say where we were going, just that it couldn't wait. I grabbed my coat and the flash drive with Kenneth's voice memos, tucked it into my purse, and met her outside. The frost on the windshield was still thick, and the engine hummed low as we pulled out of my driveway. We drove in silence for the first 5 miles. Then Elaine spoke. Her contact at the credit union had gotten access to the recipient's identity. The bank account receiving those strange transfers, every one of them was tied to a business account under the name Halverson Wellness Group. Registered just 6 months ago. Listed address, a strip mall on the edge of town. The contact name, Heather Halverson. I closed my eyes and leaned back. Elaine pulled into a parking lot outside a quiet office park and turned off the engine. The building was low brick, 2 stories, mostly empty. She handed me a small printout, Heather's LLC filing. It was official. Paperwork, address, contact email. All clean, all designed to look legitimate. She said it was a shell. No operating license, no clients, no website. But the account attached to it had over $68,000 in activity in just the past quarter. And the transfers matched the same dates we had flagged on Kenneth's accounts. Elaine had been quiet during the drive because she was calculating, putting the story together, and now she wanted me to hear it all at once. Heather used her access to Kenneth's accounts to slowly funnel money into a fake business, then used that business to buy the condo under her name. The promotion for Trent lined up with a large payment made just after a fundraiser. Elaine suspected a bribe, disguised as a consulting payment. It wasn't just betrayal. It was laundering. I sat there, the cold from outside creeping in through the floorboards. Elaine asked if I still had Kenneth's phone. I nodded. She said we needed to go through every message, every call log, every email, anything that might show direct contact between Heather and Trent during the period when Kenneth was dying. Back at the house, we worked in tandem. She scrolled through his inbox while I focused on text messages. There weren't many from Trent, But there were plenty from Heather. Some routine, some more personal than they should have been. Then Elaine found it. A forwarded email, buried in a spam folder, dated 10 months ago, from Trent's work email to Heather's personal one. Attached was a scanned document titled Plan Revision. It included a breakdown of Kenneth's insurance, recommendations for filing amendments, and a message that said, "Let me know once it's processed. We're almost there." That was enough. Elaine copied the message, saved it to the same flash drive as the voice memos, and backed it all up twice. We sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where just days ago I had been sorting papers in the dark. But everything felt different now. We weren't collecting pieces anymore. We were preparing to move. Elaine told me we had to act soon. The more time passed, the harder it would be to prove intent. Paper trails fade, memories shift, people get cautious. But she warned me, this would require more than facts. It would take precision. We agreed not to confront anyone directly. Not yet. Instead, we'd use the weight of suggestion. Let them feel something was shifting under their feet. Let them slip. Elaine drafted a letter the next morning. Not from me, and not from her. It was from a fictitious attorney based out of Des Moines. The letter was neutral in tone, addressed to Heather, simply stating that a routine audit had flagged inconsistencies regarding Kenneth's pension and insurance, and that further verification of signature authenticity was pending. It didn't accuse, it didn't threaten, it only hinted. But that was the point. We mailed it from a box 2 towns over. Then we waited. I spent the afternoon in my garden, trimming roses that had long since wilted. The air was sharp with November cold, but I didn't mind. I needed to keep my hands moving. Elaine paced the porch. Neither of us said much. By evening, Heather called. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the screen as her name flashed across it again, then again, and finally a third time, this time from a blocked number. I turned the phone face down. By morning, Cole had called too. He left a voicemail. His tone was confused. Said Heather had received a strange letter. Something about Dad's pension being under review. He sounded unsettled, and more importantly, unsure. That was the opening Elaine had hoped for. She told me to call him back, but not to explain too much, just enough to stir the pot. I waited until dusk, then dialed. I told Cole I had recently come across some old files Kenneth had tucked away, and that something about them didn't sit right. I said I had passed them along to someone who used to work in pensions, just to double check. I said nothing about the photo, or the forged signature, or the voice memos. I kept my voice calm, flat. I didn't accuse. I simply told him I was trying to make sense of everything. For myself. For closure. He didn't argue. He just said he understood. But something in his silence told me he knew more than he had ever let on. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the wind slide against the windows. I thought about Kenneth. About the way he had always been 3 steps ahead, but never made a show of it. Quiet strength. The kind that doesn't always get recognized until it's gone. The next day, Elaine returned with updates. Her contact had confirmed that Halverson Wellness Group had received a large transfer labeled as Incentive Partnership from the company Trent worked for. The amount was $25,000, and it was dated 1 week before Kenneth's pension change form was processed. That was the link we needed. Heather had not only manipulated Kenneth's records, she had done so with financial gain in mind, and Trent had approved it. Whether out of greed or pressure, it didn't matter. Elaine leaned across the table. Now it's about leverage, she said. Not court, not press, just truth. Quiet, surgical truth. We made a list of who to contact. Not family, not lawyers. Just two names. One was a former HR administrator from the company who had retired the same year Kenneth was diagnosed. The other was a journalist Elaine had trusted years ago when she exposed a similar fraud case during her early career. We didn't need headlines. We needed whispers in the right corners. Elaine sent copies of the letter, the metadata from the forged documents, and a redacted version of the voice memos to both parties. She included a short note stating that the documents were being evaluated in connection with suspected pension manipulation and internal compliance violations. The next 48 hours were quiet. Too quiet. Then something shifted. Cole stopped by. He didn't come in. He just stood at the bottom of the porch steps and said he needed to ask me something. His eyes looked tired. Guarded. He said Heather had been acting erratic, that she'd left town that morning to stay with her sister in Indiana. No explanation, no warning, just packed a bag and left. He said she'd also deleted her social media accounts and changed the password to their shared bank login. Then he looked at me. He didn't ask anything outright, but the question hung between us like smoke. I said I didn't know the full picture yet, that I was still sorting through things, that I had questions too. He nodded, then left. After he drove off, I stood on the porch alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. This wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning. And it had just begun. The following morning, I made coffee like I always did. Same kettle, same rhythm. But everything around me felt sharper, as if the air had changed its weight. Elaine arrived earlier than expected. She looked calm but moved quickly. She had heard from her friend at the paper. The journalist had reached out quietly to a retired compliance officer who once worked for the company where Trent had recently been promoted. There had been quiet rumors about unusual promotions, about signatures no one could trace, about things that never quite lined up. Elaine handed me a folder. Inside was a draft. Not a published article, not even a full story, just a timeline. Clean, factual, bullet points, Kenneth's illness, Heather's increasing control over his paperwork, Trent's sudden promotion, the condo bought in cash, the changes to the pension. The draft wasn't meant for public eyes yet. It was a warning. Elaine said we needed to be ready, because once the silence broke, there would be questions, from people I knew, from people I had trusted, maybe even from Cole. I spent the afternoon sorting everything again, not just the paperwork, my memories. The day Kenneth came home with the first diagnosis, the way he had said, "It's not a fight, Doreen, it's a path." I remember how he sat by the window every morning, watching the birds, quiet, accepting, not because he had given up, but because he didn't want the end to turn him bitter. He had trusted everyone around him, and that included her. By evening, I called Cole. He sounded tired, more than before. I asked him if he was alone. He said yes. I told him I needed him to stop by. I didn't say why. He arrived within the hour, wore the same flannel jacket Kenneth had once given him for Christmas. It used to be too big. Now it fit. He came in, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at me. I took the folder from the drawer, the one Elaine had given me. I didn't hand it to him. Not yet. Instead, I told him everything. From the first photo I had found, to the signature analysis, to the voice memos Kenneth had left behind. I told him about the fake LLC, the condo, the email between Heather and Trent, the bank transfers. I told him slowly, carefully, without embellishment, just the truth. When I was done, he didn't speak. He rubbed his hands together once, then stared at the tabletop. Then he asked the only thing that mattered, if Kenneth knew. I said yes. And I told him how his father had recorded those voice memos as a way to warn me, that he had seen the changes, felt the shift, but chose not to create chaos in the final weeks of his life. Cole sat very still. He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He just nodded. Then he asked to hear the recordings. So I played them, one by one, from beginning to end. When they were done, he sat in silence for another minute, then stood up and walked out the back door. I didn't follow him. I just let him be. Elaine stopped by later that night. She brought another update. The journalist had officially submitted a request to the company for a statement, a formal inquiry. Nothing public yet, but it was enough to rattle the surface. Elaine looked tired. Her hands ached, but her voice was clear. She told me it was time to finalize the letter, not to the press, not to Heather, but to the board. The company's board of trustees had oversight over pensions, over policy, over all executive decisions. They were old school, private, and allergic to scandal. Elaine said, "If we submitted everything through the proper internal whistleblower process, it would trigger an investigation. But it had to be timed right." She said Cole was the key now. His silence could protect me, or unravel the whole thing if he panicked. That night, I sat by the fireplace and watched the embers fade. I thought about Heather, about the way she used to bring me tea during Kenneth's treatments, the way she laughed too loudly at Thanksgiving, the way she always insisted on making the pie from scratch, but never cleaned up afterward. I thought about Trent, how polite he had been, how invisible. And then I thought about Kenneth, his hands, his calm, his silence. I opened my journal and started writing. Not a confession, not a plan, just a truth. Line by line, I wrote down everything I had seen, everything I had felt. Not for evidence, not for anyone else, for me. Because once the storm began, I needed to remember why I started, not out of vengeance, but for dignity, for justice, and for the man who never raised his voice, but always saw everything. Elaine submitted it through the internal compliance portal used by former employees and family members of pension holders. She made sure it was encrypted, time-stamped, and verified. The flash drive with all the supporting documents was hand-delivered the same day. No email, no courier, no traceable trail. That afternoon, the air felt too still. I swept the porch 3 times, not because it needed it, because I couldn't sit still. The waiting felt heavier than the planning. Cole hadn't said much since our last conversation. He stopped calling, stopped texting, but he didn't disappear. He was there, in the periphery, dropping off a bag of groceries, leaving the trash bins back in place after pickup. Little gestures. His way of staying close without facing what he now knew. Elaine told me not to worry, that everyone reacts differently to betrayal, especially when it comes from the person they chose to build a life with. By Saturday morning, a white sedan I didn't recognize parked across the street. 2 men in dark jackets sat inside. Didn't get out, didn't make a scene. They just waited. Then one of them got out, walked to my mailbox, and retrieved nothing. He didn't carry a badge, didn't speak. But he looked at the house for just a moment too long before walking back to the car. Elaine said that meant the board had received the letter and that their internal review had started. Nothing official, just the quiet stirrings of accountability. That same day, Trent's name disappeared from the company website. No photo, no title, no mention. By Monday, the phone rang again. This time it was Heather. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short, shaky. She said she hoped I was well, that she'd like to meet for coffee. No apology, no mention of Kenneth, just a careful voice trying to find a thread to pull. I deleted it. Elaine came by in this evening with coffee and pie. She looked tired but pleased. She said a source inside the compliance office had confirmed that an investigation was officially underway, that several internal emails were being reviewed, that pension policy changes in the past year had triggered anomalies. We sat on the porch with our coats zipped up, watching the wind pull dry leaves from the trees. She said I had done everything right, that I had honored Kenneth, not by shouting, but by standing still. By the end of the week, Cole finally knocked. He looked worn, older, but quieter in a different way. He didn't ask to come in. He just said one thing. He had filed for divorce. He said it calmly, as if it were inevitable. He didn't explain. He didn't cry. I didn't ask why. He stood there for another few seconds, then turned to leave. I watched him go. I didn't call out. That night, I found myself sitting in Kenneth's old chair, the one by the fireplace. I had avoided it for weeks, but now it felt different. Not like stepping into grief, but like closing a circle. I pulled out the journal I had started, the one filled with facts and names and timelines, and I began a new section, not for evidence, but for myself. I wrote down what I had learned, that silence is not weakness, that truth doesn't need noise to be felt, that betrayal cuts deepest when it wears the mask of love, and that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering clearly and choosing peace anyway. By the following Wednesday, Elaine brought a letter, official, from the board. It didn't include apologies, but it did confirm that Kenneth's pension had been mishandled, that there was sufficient evidence to reverse the last amendment, that his original beneficiary, me, would be restored, retroactively. Elaine handed me the envelope and waited for me to react. But I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just nodded. Because it was never about the money. It was about dignity, about setting the record straight, about making sure that Kenneth's final months weren't rewritten by someone else's ambition. Elaine looked at me and said I should think about what I wanted to do next. She had heard whispers that more names were being reviewed, that Trent was facing disciplinary action, that others might come forward with similar stories. But I didn't feel like chasing anything. I felt like breathing. I walked outside and stood at the edge of the yard. The wind was soft, the sky low and open. Somewhere, deep in the soil, winter was preparing to settle in. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel cold. I felt free. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. I stopped setting alarms in the morning. I let the light decide when to open my eyes. There was no pressure, no panic, just breath. For the first time in a long while, I ate breakfast at the table instead of standing near the sink. I took the time to butter my toast, fold the napkin properly, refill my cup before it was empty. Small rituals. They made the air feel less like waiting, more like living. Elaine suggested I take a short trip, just a few days, somewhere not tied to anything, somewhere my grief couldn't trace. I thought about it, even looked up train routes. But I stayed, not because I was stuck, because I was rooted. The investigation wasn't done, but my part in it was. Kenneth's pension had been restored, and with it, the part of him I had feared, lost in paperwork and silence. Cole came by once a week now. We didn't talk about Heather. We didn't talk about divorce papers or settlement meetings. We just talked about the weather, the yard, the plans for spring. I could see the weight in his shoulders hadn't lifted, but it had settled into something he could carry. He helped me fix the back gate. The hinge had rusted over from years of ignoring it. It groaned every time the wind pushed it open. Cole brought tools. I brought lemonade. It took an hour. Neither of us spoke much, but that wasn't the point. Sometimes healing doesn't need words. Elaine dropped off a newspaper clipping later that week. It was short. Just a mention that Trent had stepped down from his role due to what the company called an internal restructuring. There were no details, no noise, just a line between two updates on market trends. But I read that sentence 3 times. Then I folded it, tucked it into the journal, and didn't touch it again. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. Elaine came over the next day. She brought fresh basil from her garden and a tin of scones. We sat outside with blankets over our laps. She asked if I had decided what to do next. I hadn't. She smiled and said, maybe that was the best part. Having space again. Not needing to know right away. Just breathing room. After months of bracing for the next twist, I finally felt the ground beneath me stop shifting. But one thing lingered. The flash drive. I still kept it in the bottom drawer of the hallway table. I hadn't opened it since the board's letter arrived. But I couldn't bring myself to delete it either. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a record. Of Kenneth. Of his voice. Of his clarity. His strength. That night, I played one of the voice memos again. Not because I needed answers, because I missed the sound of him. The message wasn't long, just a few thoughts he had recorded on a cold morning after a doctor visit. He had talked about the nurse with the purple scrubs, about the soup he wanted me to make that evening. And then, at the end, he said something that caught my breath. He said, I don't know how much time I've got, but I want to leave you something better than money. I want to leave you knowing you'll stand straight when I'm gone. I paused the recording. Let the silence stretch. He had known. He had seen all of it coming, not the details, but the shape of the storm, and he had trusted me to walk through it. The next morning, I mailed the flash drive to my lawyer, sealed, labeled, with instructions to archive it, but not erase it. Just in case someone, someday, might need to understand how quiet betrayal can be loud if you learn to listen right. The garden needed pruning again, so I did that. Trimmed the dead weight, let light reach where it hadn't in years. I found a folded paper in Kenneth's old coat. I don't remember putting it there. It was a shopping list. Bananas, soup broth, his favourite jam. And at the bottom, in his handwriting, a small line that wasn't part of any recipe. It said, "You are enough." I placed it in the drawer beside the clipped newspaper and left it there. Not to revisit, just to remember. The letter from the board had brought quiet, but what followed was something else entirely. About 2 weeks later, I received a formal-looking envelope from the firm handling Kenneth's pension. Not just confirmation of retroactive reinstatement, but a detailed statement. Every deduction, every reversed transaction, every restored benefit. I held it in my hands like it was something sacred. It wasn't about the money, but seeing it written, his name, the full amount, the official seal, gave a sense of justice I hadn't realized I needed. Elaine came by that afternoon. We read through it together, each page slow and careful. There it was. Every month accounted for. 30 years and 2 weeks of contributions. Full vesting rights honoured. Lump sum adjusted. Future payments scheduled. At the bottom, a note. Due to administrative error, a one-time corrective distribution would be issued within 30 days. I stared at the amount. $234,000. Elaine put her hand on mine. She didn't need to say anything. Later that evening, I lit a candle for Kenneth. Not for ceremony, just to keep something warm in the room. I sat in his chair again, let the light flicker across the wall. This wasn't a reward. It was a restoration. But the quiet didn't last long. The next morning, I stepped outside to pick up the paper and saw an envelope wedged into the front door frame. No stamp, no address, just my name. Inside was a handwritten note. Heather. She didn't try to deny anything. She didn't explain. All she wrote was that she hoped I could find peace, that she hadn't meant for things to spiral, that she loved Kenneth in her own way, that everything was more complicated than it looked. No apology, just a soft attempt at rewriting her part in it. Elaine told me not to respond. I agreed. But it lingered. The idea that someone could cause so much harm and still feel entitled to comfort. I let the paper sit in a drawer with the rest of it. Cole stopped by again the following Sunday. He looked tired, thinner, but he stood straighter than before. He said the divorce was finalized, clean, no contest. He didn't ask for sympathy, just said it was time. We sat outside for a while. He helped me trim back some of the hedges, said he was planning to move out of town. Not far, just a change. He asked if I would be all right. I told him yes, because I was. Not fully healed, but steady. Before he left, he handed me a small box. Inside was Kenneth's old watch. Cole said it had been in Heather's jewelry drawer. She never wore it. He thought it should come back home. I held it for a long moment, let the weight of it sit in my palm. That night, I wrapped it in a cloth and placed it next to Kenneth's journal. In the morning, I made a call to the community foundation in town. I had been thinking for weeks about what to do with the pension restoration. It didn't feel right just letting it sit. It wasn't mine alone. It was a story, a legacy, a warning. I asked to schedule a meeting, told them I had an idea. They said they'd be happy to hear it. The office was small, just 2 rooms and a shared kitchenette. But the moment I stepped inside the foundation, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. They greeted me warmly, but not with pity. They didn't ask what had happened. They listened. I explained what I wanted. Not a donation, not a plaque, a program. A small, structured initiative designed to help women, especially older women, navigate financial transitions after the loss of a spouse. To understand pensions, estate rights, insurance traps, and how to protect themselves when everything feels like it's unraveling. The director paused for a long moment. Then she said yes. We called it the Doreen Project. It wasn't flashy. No banners, no gala, just a dedicated resource tucked into the heart of the city. A room with someone who could listen, advise, and hand over a checklist that could save years of confusion. I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about women like me, the ones who stood quietly in the corner of the room for too long, who didn't realize that love could blind them to quiet theft, who needed someone to tell them it wasn't too late to stand up. The first time I sat in that room with a widow named Marla, she cried before she said a word. Not because of grief, but because I told her she wasn't alone. That moment was more valuable than any refund or statement I had received. I still walk past Kenneth's chair every day. Sometimes I sit. Not because I miss the past, but because I finally know how to carry it forward. Cole moved 2 counties away. We still talk sometimes, but he's on his own journey now. Elaine checks in weekly. She's helping me document the early results of the project, tracking the number of women who come through, the questions they ask, the systems they uncover. Sometimes we catch small frauds. Mostly we catch fear and help turn it into something else. I don't think Kenneth ever imagined this path for me, but in a way, he paved it, with every word he left behind, with every quiet instinct he followed in those last weeks. And now, As winter edges closer and the air grows still again, I stand in my kitchen with the light spilling across the tile, and I feel no bitterness, no rage, just peace. Not because it all worked out, but because I did not let it break me. I learned to read the silence, to plant new seeds in the cracks betrayal left behind, to find strength not in being loud, but in being clear, and to honor love by living with eyes open. That is enough. That is everything. If this story found its way into your heart, maybe because you've stood in shoes like mine, I hope it offered you more than just a moment. I hope it gave you something to hold. And if you've ever felt unheard or underestimated, know this: your voice still matters. You still matter. Let me know if this story echoed something in you. I'll be here, still telling stories that feel like home.